Hello and welcome to North Star Oasis. I'm your host, Jeff Williams. We're here for another action-packed, jam-packed, action-filled information overload on this chilly December day. Now, notice I said chilly, not cold. I've actually remember some December days that were colder than this, but with the humidity in the air, with the cooler temperatures, it is a little bit bone chilling, at least for me it is. I do not like this cold winter weather, but it could be a lot worse. But this does remind me that as we now are in December, and I hope you had a great Thanksgiving, but we're in December now. We're looking forward to Christmas. But before we get to Christmas, we have to get through Pearl Harbor Day. Yes, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and had brought the United States into World War II. And that's our Prager University segment of today, which was taken at the University of Minnesota when they asked students questions, Minnesota students questions about what they know about Pearl Harbor.
What's up, guys? This is Will Witt with PragerU. Today we're at the University of Minnesota. It's the coldest I've ever been, and we're asking people today about Pearl Harbor, its significance, and what they know about it. Let's get started. When did Pearl Harbor take place?
Ooh, 1960s sometime?
I feel like it's somewhere in the 80s.
1914 or something.
1914?
Yeah, it's something with World War I.
World War II. If you switch the 4 and the 1, you're right, it's 1941. Do you know the day?
No. I want to say November 11th or May 7th. Those are my 2 dates I'm thinking of.
It's December 7th,
December 7th. Okay.
1941. Where's Pearl Harbor located?
Is it, okay, it's either off the coast of Florida or Hawaii-ish.
Which one?
Ooh,
50-50.
I'm gonna go with Florida.
It was Hawaii.
Dang it! Okay.
Yeah. Is it as cold up there as it is down here?
In Hawaii?
Do you know who attacked Pearl Harbor?
I'm done.
Okay. It's so cold. The attack on Pearl Harbor, when did that take place?
December 7th, 1941.
There you go. Where is Pearl Harbor located?
Hawaii.
Okay. And who attacked us at Pearl Harbor?
The Japanese.
Why is it important to know about Pearl Harbor and what happened?
It started American involvement in World War II.
This is the first major attack on U.S. soil.
And the only way that the Allies could come back and win was with our help. It helped the world out a great deal.
Do you think that you should know more about Pearl Harbor?
I do think I should.
Yeah. Why do you think that?
Because it's an important piece of our history, and it's important for people to be informed. Otherwise, similar situations could arise, and history's taught a lot of lessons. So yes, it's important.
Yeah. Did you learn something today?
I did, thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
And there you have it. That was from the campus of the University of Minnesota. And I can tell you this, there's probably one person there who is a regular viewer of North Star Oasis. It's got to be. And that was the guy in the red jacket who actually answered the question right, because we cover this constantly on our show. So I have a feeling he actually lives in St. Paul and he watches this on SPNN. I'm hoping. Yes, tomorrow is the anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, so please take a moment and just reflect on what that means. And you can go to our YouTube channel or Facebook page, youtube.com/NorthStarOasis or Facebook.com/NorthStarOasis. And you can look back at some of our previous episodes on Pearl Harbor if you're so inclined and interested, if you feel that you don't know enough. We've got plenty of material out there. Of course, Pearl Harbor was a momentous day for a lot of people. It spurred a lot of action. And when I say action, meaning people who were signing up for military service because they felt it was the right thing to do. And one of the people who did that was George Herbert Walker Bush. We know the former president passed away. As a matter of fact, as we're taping this program, he is specialized Union Pacific locomotive number 4141 is just getting ready to, his casket is getting ready to be placed aboard that train for him to go to College Station, Texas, to the President Bush Library on the campus of Texas A&M University, his final resting place. That's what's happening right now as we tape this. So we don't have any footage we're going to show you of that train, but we are going to take a look at the life and legacy of President George Herbert Walker Bush. What we are not going to do is give you the wrap-up of the funeral. You can get that on any other station right now. You are not going to just get a wrap-up of his presidential term, because he was much more than that. But keeping in the North Star Oasis tradition of going deeper than most other outlets, we are going to show you now for the remainder of this hour more about the life and legacy of President George Herbert Walker Bush. And we're going to start that with him looking back on World War II. And this was shot a couple of years ago. And I think it's well worth taking the time to watch, especially as we head into the Pearl Harbor anniversary.
Well, on September 2nd, 1944, my torpedo bomber and I took off from the USS San Jacinto. We were part of Task Force 58. The very next day, we were to move south under Halsey's fleet to be part of Task Force 38. And so I knew that after this mission, our ship would head south, couple of thousand miles away. Any event, it was a clear day. Best of my memory, I was just turned 20, and I knew it was going to be a fairly dangerous mission because the day before, our air group, our squadron, VT-51, had flown over Chichijima, and we'd encountered a fair amount of flak. So I knew it was going to be tough. But this was our duty, was no question about it. And the thing that was different on this flight is my friend, who was the gunnery officer, a fellow Yale graduate, came up to me and said, "Can I fly with you, Ted White?" And I said, "Sure, if you want to. I mean, but you got to get permission from the skipper of our squadron." And he said, well, he had no problem with it. So my gunner did not fly, and Ted White did. Anyway, we climbed to 10,000 or 12,000, and our mission was to drop 4 500-pound bombs on a radio station on Chichijima. And I was the second two-man flights, two of them, the leader, our skipper, and then I had a guy named Milt Moore on my wing. And we dove over, pushed over at about that. You feel like you're going straight down, but it was about I think 40 degrees or maybe less, but you felt like a dive bomb. Anyway, we got in there. The flak was very heavy. You could just see it and hear it almost around you. As I was 2/3 of the way down, I felt this whole plane jolt forward, and soon it was a lot of smoke. I looked on the wings of the plane after I pulled out, and you could see the flames going down where the wings folded on the TBF, and I knew I was in serious trouble. I did manage to, before pulling out to go out to try to get to safety, I did manage to drop the bombs, and did what I was paid to do, what I wanted to do for our country. Then I went out to sea. I saw that I couldn't possibly fly this plane back to the ship, and it was all happening very fast. When I saw the flame along the wing, which is right where the fuel tanks are, I said, I better get out of here. Turned the plane to the right to take the wind off the take the slipstream off the door where the crewman's supposed to get out. Made about a 180, and then I told them to get out, and then I jumped out myself. It turned out that one of them, fortunately, one of them had gotten out, reported by the Japanese and confirmed where he went down, which was a great relief to me, even though I still worry about the loss of those 2 men to this very day. I made an exit from the plane, dove out onto the wing. I did it very badly. I pulled the ripcord too soon. I hit my head on the tail, the horizontal stabilizer of the TBF, and glancing blow like this and bleeding like a stuck pig. And the parachute momentarily hung up on the tail of the plane, and it ripped out some of the panels of the chute. So I fell faster than I normally would have. I dropped into the ocean, and I've managed to get the chute off properly. You're supposed to undo the strap here and then hold your hands up so when you hit the water the chute will blow away, which it did, right on towards Chichijima. And but I had failed to hook my seat pack on, hook my lifeboat onto the parachute. So a fighter plane came, dove down, showed me where that was, and I swam over, got into this life raft, and started paddling as fast as I could to go out to sea. The wind was blowing towards Chichi, and I was blowing towards Chichi also. And I swam as fast as I could. I was sick to my stomach. I was scared, and I wondered what happened to my crewmen. And suddenly I saw this periscope. Hoped like hell it was a U.S. submarine. We were in Japanese waters. And it was the USS Finback. They came alongside and picked me up, pulled me onto the deck, and the ship went back down again. The submarine went back down, and that started 30 terrifying days as we stayed on war patrol for 30 days on that submarine, on a voyage which won our skipper of the submarine a Silver Star. So it was a traumatic experience, but no different than a lot of kids went through in World War II. And that's the point I want to make, because people, talk about, well, you're a hero. Well, there's nothing heroic about doing your duty, trying to serve with honor, and there's nothing heroic about getting shot down. I've always wondered at how they honor you if you've been shot down, but if you do what you were supposed to do, land your plane safely back on the ship, you're just another pilot.
One question: how did the sub know you were there? Was it
well, they had life-saving subs if they weren't otherwise occupied. There'd be a submarine, and they'd check in somewhere and say, we're in this area. So when I went down, there was the skipper of my squadron used that frequency to tell whatever submarine was listening, this is the pilot's down, here's where he is. And they just came in. They'd rescued a guy earlier from Iwo Jima, I think it was, or Hahajima, which was another island there, then me. And then after I was safely on board, we went in and pulled another guy out, Ensign Beckman of the Enterprise. And I was just very lucky the submarine was there, because, as I said, this fleet was going south, and I knew that I would be, if somebody didn't pick me up, I would have been captured and killed. They were very brutal on Chichijima.
When you're out on this life raft, after your plane went down and didn't know what happened to crew guys, what is a young 20-year-old airman at the time? You said you were scared. You didn't know what was going to go on.
You say your prayers. You think about your family. In my case, my mother and my father. You have to worry about the men that didn't get out of the plane. Thank God one of them had. And you just pray that, selfishly, that you'll be all right, that you'll be saved.
And
I was sick to my stomach, and it was traumatic.
Sorry. Okay. After 62 years or some odd years, I understand you always question why me, or people oftentimes in that situation.
Yeah.
Since you've had marriage, children, obviously your career, does it take a different feel when you look back on that now? Or it just is still a question as a young man, why you, and how did that happen?
No, you always ask that, why me? I asked that when my daughter, innocent little beautiful girl, came down with leukemia. She was 4 years old, pure and innocent, and it was, why us? Well, why this little girl? And so I think it's understandable that you ask that question. I did back then, and probably would again if there was something as traumatic as that. But I think it's normal. We have great faith in our family, and sometimes you wonder why God acts as He does. And the Lord acts in mysterious ways. You just accept that, you pray about it, you get on with your life. You don't sit around wringing your hands and whining. And so I was blessed in this naval experience, and I wondered why was I spared when 2 friends in the plane with me were killed. I don't know the answer.
So now, if you look at what the president did, what then the aviator, Lieutenant Junior Grade Bush, did for the rest of his life, that was an incredible thing for him to experience at the age of 20. And you know that up until the day he died, a little over a week ago, that that was a very big influence on him. Well, after the war, before we go to after the war, when he signed up for the Navy, he was actually transferred to the Naval Training Center in Minneapolis. And he took his first solo flight. Where is that Navy Training Center? That is currently the 934th Airlift Wing of the U.S. Air Force Reserve, that base on the north side of the airport. There's a little bit of a dispute as far as where he made his first solo, because the training squadron was using the active runway at both Wold Chamberlain Field, the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport today, and at Fleming Field in South St. Paul. So one of those 2 airstrips is where he actually made his first solo flight as a pilot. And it was right here in the Twin Cities. And then, of course, after training, that's when he went to Torpedo Squadron 51 and became an aviator, had the Chichijimi experience. When he left, he ended up going to Yale University. Now, he was born in Massachusetts. He wasn't from Texas. He was born in Massachusetts. He was from New England. And he had married Barbara Pierce when he was still in the Navy. And then he went over to Yale, and he was a member of the baseball team. And another thing on President Bush's priorities was, I hate to say priorities, but his legacies. He had a very, very active interest in baseball. That was his favorite pastime, not just America's, but his specifically. And so we're going to take a look right now at the next 2 clips. We're going to play them back to back. The first one is of just his genuine love for America's pastime. And then something he did in March of 2016, so just 2.5 years ago, he threw out the first pitch, or pitches, for a baseball game versus Texas A&M and Yale. He had attended Yale, was a first baseman for the Yale baseball team, but his presidential library is on the campus of Texas A&M. So we're going to show both of these together.
President Bush will now throw out two ceremonial first pitches today, one to the Bulldogs and one to the Aggies. As we mentioned, there will be two ceremonial first pitches. President Bush will throw one to the Yale Bulldogs and then throw one to the Fighting Texas Aggies. Probably not the first time you've heard this, Mr. President, but you may fire when ready. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, let's hear it for our 41st President of the United States, George H.W. Bush.
He graduated from Yale in 1948 with a bachelor's degree in economics, and then he moved his young family to West Texas. His father, Preston Bush, had business connections, and he got into the oil business, starting as an oil field equipment salesman for Dresser Industries. And then and Prescott, his father, had served on the board of directors for 22 years. He lived in various places, Odessa, along with Midland, and he did spend some time in California, Ventura, Bakersfield, Compton. And 1951, he started the Bush Overby Oil Development Company. And 1953, co-founded the Zapata Petroleum Corporation that drilled in the Permian Basin in Texas. And then in 1954, he was named president of the Zapata Offshore Company, which specialized in offshore drilling. And so he became pretty wealthy. He was a millionaire by the time he was 40, being at the right place at the right time with the right connections in the oil industry in Texas. He began his career in politics in 1963 when he was elected to the chairman of the Harris County Republican Party in Harris County, Texas, and then ran against Ralph Yarborough in the U.S. Senate race, and he lost that election 56 to 44%. And then in 1966, he was elected to Congress in the 7th Congressional District of Texas, and he won 57% to against the District Attorney of Harris County, Frank Briscoe, and then he served for 2 terms. And then in the 1970 election, he lost to Lloyd Benston, who later became a vice presidential candidate himself, went on to defeat Bush 53.4 to 46.6%. And it was at that point in time that President Nixon had appointed him to the position of U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, a post he held for 2 years. And then after Bob Dole resigned as chairman of the RNC in 1972, Nixon named Bush to head the Republican National Committee, and he held this position during the Watergate years. And then President Ford had appointed Bush to be the U.S. liaison office with China, and then subsequently the director of Central Intelligence, the head of the CIA, from 1976 to 1977. So Bush was rising pretty rapidly within the ranks of the Republican Party. He, again, had done the right things, and he had the right connections. And it was just a matter of the right place at the right time. So we're going to take a look right now at a documentary put out by the CIA about Bush's time with that agency. I don't know how much of this we're going to play, so we're probably going to cut back early, but let's take a look and see where this goes.
This is a man who has had a distinguished public life when you stop and think about it. Vice President, President of the United States, father of another President of the United States, CIA Director, Ambassador to China, Ambassador to the United Nations.
That he's an incredibly capable man who has handled every task that the country has called upon him with great class and dignity.
He's an extraordinarily caring individual. He's the most considerate and kind and thoughtful person I've ever known in my life. And you can talk to a lot of people about George H.W. Bush and they'll all tell you the same thing.
George H.W. Bush was appointed CIA director precisely at the worst time in the agency's entire history.
This was a particularly tough time because the CIA was under extraordinary attack. You'd had the church hearings, the Pike hearings. The CIA was held in minimal low regard around the country because of the nature of those hearings. It was a really tough time for the agency.
Well, this made all the papers. We were the nation's villain, I guess.
This is the story of a 30-year search by U.S. intelligence agencies to perfect mind control.
It was a terrible time. Congress had it in for the agency.
Why did you do this? Why did you do that? We found this. Tell us about that.
Does this pistol fire the dart?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chairman, and a special one was developed.
As a murder instrument, that's about as efficient as you can get, isn't it?
It is a weapon, a very serious weapon.
In 1975, George H.W. Bush was the senior U.S. representative in Beijing when President Ford asked him to lead CIA. Bush was a loyal public servant, highly regarded, but he was also a politician with political ambitions. And this appointment posed a problem for him. His friends and political counselors advised against it.
I felt that he ought not to take it. I thought he was sort of being consigned to political oblivion. But he said, listen, Jimmy, he said, this is an important job. It's a job I want to do. It's a job the president wants me to do, and I'm going to take it if I can get confirmed.
I'm doing a lot of briefing, reading some of the hearings from previous directors, questioning rather soft compared to what I expect I'll be running into. It's funny how the mail reflects the different moods. Some say they're shoving you into a meat grinder, a dead end, getting rid of you politically. We don't like it. Destroy you. Others are saying they think it's great. I'll be damned if I know right now which is which.
Certain senators were reluctant to confirm a politician in a non-political position. They were playing politics. They wanted him to agree not to run as vice president on the Ford ticket in 1976.
He said, no, I'm not willing to do that. I shouldn't be asked to forswear my political birthright simply to be confirmed by the Senate for a job that I think, at least, I'm well qualified to do. And then they worked out a compromise, and that compromise was that President Ford would say, okay, you confirm him, and I will agree not to pick him as my vice president.
Welcome, George.
Welcome to the CIA. Thank you for
I remember that day very well. It was an uncommonly warm January day in 1976 when George H.W. Bush arrived at the CIA headquarters to take over as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency.
The duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
On which I am about to enter.
So help you God.
So help me God.
In his first remarks as Director of Central Intelligence, Bush said that we must learn from the past, but focus on the tasks ahead.
Restoration of public confidence is essential if we are to get on about our important work here. But the emphasis now will be on the future. And because of its dedicated people, this agency is the finest intelligence agency in the world. They will have my total support, and I'll work hard at that. We are not in the policy business. We'll call them as we see them. and we'll be objective in our estimates. I'm determined to protect those things that must be kept secret. And I am more determined to protect those unselfish and patriotic people who, with total dedication, serve their country, often putting their lives on the line, only to have some people bent on destroying this agency expose their names. This must stop, and I'll do my level best to play a role in that. I want this job. I want to do it well, and I'm proud to be a part of the CIA. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, hey, we got to go to work.
CIA needed his leadership. Morale was plummeting. Dad knew how important the intelligence world is to the, for the security of the country and for the White House to be able to make good decisions. He also knew how to boost people's spirits, and turns out he was a perfect fit for the job.
That was the essence of George Bush and how he did things. He was not out to upend the agency, he was there to help heal it.
It was important to end it, and he ended it in a graceful manner, a deliberate manner, to say, enough, we need to move on.
George Bush came in.
Of course, after Jimmy Carter won in 1976, that meant that there would be a new boss in charge of CIA, so Bush became chairman of the executive committee of the First International Bank in Houston, and then later spent a year as a part-time professor of administrative science at Rice University's Jones School of Business, beginning in 1978. And at the same time, from 77 to 79, he was the director on the Council on Foreign Relations, foreign policy organization that is also subject to many conspiracy theories. But then by the late 1970s, Bush pretty much had in his mind that he was going to run for president, and so he ran in 1980 for the Republican nomination. Keep in mind, in '76, there was talk about him becoming the vice presidential nominee for Ford. That didn't happen. I believe that was Dole or Rockefeller who got that. I can't remember which one. And then Ford was challenged in the 1976 primaries by Ronald Reagan. And what has since become history in the Republican Party, it seems that the second place finisher the next time around will become the heir apparent or the top dog head nominee. Put in a great place. And that's what happened. Reagan was on, that 76 challenge put Reagan on the springboard for the 1980 nomination, and one of his chief rivals was George H.W. Bush. And so we're going to look right now at two more clips that we're going to play back to back. First one is a nomination debate between Bush and Reagan, answering a question on immigration during the 1980 nomination, and then a George Bush for President 1980 campaign commercial. I'm going to show those back to back.
Yes, my name is David Grossberg, and I'd like to know, do you think the children of illegal aliens should be allowed to attend Texas public schools free, or do you think that their parents should pay for their education?
Who are you addressing that to?
I think you're first in this.
He was looking right at you. I said he was. Look, I'd like to see something done about the illegal alien problem that would be so sensitive and so understanding about labor needs and human needs that that problem wouldn't come up. But today, if those people are here, I would reluctantly say I think they would get whatever it is that they're, what the society is giving to their neighbors. But the problem has to be solved. The problem has to be solved because as we have kind of made illegal some kinds of labor that I'd like to see legal, we're doing two things. We're creating a whole society of really honorable, decent, family-loving people that are in violation of the law, and secondly, we're exacerbating relations with Mexico. The answer to your question is much more fundamental than whether they attend Houston schools, it seems to me. I don't want to see if they're living here, I don't want to see a whole thing of 6- and 8-year-old kids being made, one totally uneducated and made to feel that they're living with outside the law. Let's address ourselves to the fundamentals. These are good people, strong people. Part of my family is a Mexican. Can I add to that? I think the time has come that the United States and our neighbors, particularly our neighbor to the south, should have a better understanding and a better relationship than we've ever had. And I think that we haven't been sensitive enough to our size and our power. They have a problem of 40 to 50% unemployment. Now, this cannot continue without the possibility arising with regard to that other country that we talked about, of Cuba and what it is stirring up, of the possibility of trouble below the border, and we could have a very hostile and strange neighbor on our border. Rather than making them or talking about putting up a fence, why don't we work out some recognition of our mutual problems, make it possible for them to come here legally with a work permit, and then while they're working and earning here, they pay taxes here. And when they want to go back, they can go back, and they can cross and open the border both ways by understanding their problems. This is the only safety valve right now they have with that unemployment that probably keeps the lid from blowing off down there. And I think we could have a fine relationship, and it would solve the problem you mentioned also.
This is not a professional film. It was made September 22nd, 1944 by a crew member of the USS Finback, an American submarine that surfaced in Japanese patrolled waters to rescue a downed American flyer. For George Bush, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and a personal commitment to preserve peace for our country by maintaining a strong national defense. His record in world diplomacy and as director of the CIA make George Bush a president we won't have to train.
Now, in 1980, Bush actually defeated Reagan in the Iowa caucuses narrowly, but then Reagan ended up trouncing him in New Hampshire, and then Bush ended up losing most of the other states after that. And so Bush was out of the contest, Reagan became the nominee, and at just the last minute possible, when Reagan was trying to decide on who to bring on the ticket while at the convention, he decided to go with George Herbert Walker Bush. And so Bush served for the next 8 years as vice president, and then as early as '85 began planning his own presidential run to succeed Reagan, who was term limited out. And so in 1988, the challengers for the nomination, the main challengers, of course, were George Herbert Walker Bush, Senator Bob Dole, Representative Jack Kemp, Governor Pete DuPont, and televangelist Pat Robertson. I forgot Pat Robertson was in that race. And for the record, I was coming of age in politics at that point in time. I paid very close attention to that. Not to say I didn't pay close attention in '80 and '84, but by '88, I mean, I was, what, 17 years old by that election day. So I was really tuned into that race. I was a Jack Kemp supporter. I'm going to make that perfectly clear. I supported Jack Kemp. I still think Kemp would have made an excellent president. But be it as it may, Bush had the machinery in place. He was an early front runner for that nomination. He did come in third in Iowa behind Dole and Pat Robertson. But then, just like what happened 8 years before, like when Reagan reorganized the staff, Bush did the same thing, concentrated on New Hampshire, and then ended up really having a huge night on Super Tuesday. And I remember that night where the polls in it were showing that it could go either way, Dole or Bush, and then all of a sudden you see all these states that went to Bush. And it was the organizational strength and fundraising lead. It was just impossible for the other candidates to match. And so then 1988, and this is another one where we're going to show two clips back to back. Here is from the road to the White House. This is a clip from that C-SPAN put together from Bush on the campaign trail in '88, one of his speeches. And then a convention flashback to something that came back to really bite him later on in his life from the Republican National Convention in 1988. Let's take a look at the 1988 campaign.
I am committed to this fight as a parent, a grandparent, and for me it gets right back to education. Let's get the drug dealers out of our schools, and let's get reading, writing, and arithmetic and respect back into our schools. The fight against drugs, the fight against international terror, representing our country in 76 foreign countries abroad since becoming vice president. This has all been part of my work as vice president. And now I've begun a new challenge, running for President of the United States. And I mean to run hard, to fight hard, to stand on the issues, and to win. But let me add this. I've been a loyal vice president. I've stood with this president, and I will continue to be loyal to this president. And if the price to the top of the ladder, is to shove the president down a notch or jump away when the going gets tough, I am not willing to pay that price. I'm the one who will not raise taxes. My opponent now says he'll raise them as a last resort or a third resort. But when a politician talks like that, you know that's one resort he'll be checking into. And my opponent won't rule out raising taxes, but I will, and the Congress will push me to raise taxes, and I'll say no. And they'll push, and I'll say no, and they'll push again, and I'll say to them, read my lips, no new taxes. I say it without boast or bravado. I've fought for my country, I've served, I've built, and I'll go from the hills to the hollows, from the cities to the suburbs, to the loneliest town on the quietest street, to take our message of hope and growth for every American, to every American. I will keep America moving forward, always forward, for a better America, for an endless, enduring dream and 1,000 points of light. This is my mission, and I will complete it.
Whereas in 1980, when it was a choice between Reagan and Bush, Bush was more the moderate. Reagan was the true conservative in that race. And how did George Herbert Walker Bush do as president? We're going to just take a quick review of some of his accomplishments. First of all, let's take a look at judicial appointments, because we've just had a couple of judicial appointments not too long ago. He did make 2 appointments to the U.S. Supreme Court, David Souter in 1990 and Clarence Thomas in 1991, and we have really discussed the parallels between Thomas and Kavanaugh. He also appointed 42 judges to the U.S. Court of Appeals and 148 judges to U.S. district courts. He also had 11 nominees for the 10 federal appellate judgeships were not processed by the Democrats on the Judiciary Committee. And the Judiciary Committee chairman at that time was Joe Biden. Domestically speaking, he, how do we put it here? I mean, he had a number of educational initiatives. Not necessarily sure how they turned out. He did sign the Higher Education Amendments of 1992, resuming many of the programs in the Higher Education Act of 1965. Economically speaking, he was a moderate. He was not a fiscal conservative. He did sign into law and was a big advocate for the Americans with Disabilities Act. But then he was really known for foreign policy. I mean, you had Operation Just Cause in 1989 when the U.S. went to oust Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega. And then you also had the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1989. That was actually my first quarter in college when the Berlin Wall came down. And so that was a very big thing at the time. And then right after that, you had the invasion of Kuwait by Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard from Iraq and the beginning of Desert Shield and Desert Storm. So a lot of foreign policy things going on at that time. I think some of it, Bush did the best he could with what he had. I think some of it, he had a little bit high expectations, and we're still paying a price today. And I'm trying to give a fair and honest assessment here. And I'm really talking more about the fall of the Soviet Union. I think that there were certain elements of the former Soviets who wanted to be more westernized, wanted to be recognized in NATO, wanted to become a major player, and they should have become major players. And instead, I mean, especially since they were fending off hardliners in their own right, and one of those people happened to have been Vladimir Putin, working with Boris Yeltsin. So I think that there were things that could have been done differently in handling Yeltsin and Putin, whereas on the other hand, the fact that they didn't go right back into communism to the extent that you had with Yuri Andropov and some of the other Soviet premiers, I think is also a remarkable thing. So there were some positives, there were not so good things, but that's what happens when you're dealing in foreign policy. I mean, you take a look with what's happening in North Korea right now with President Trump's negotiation, that we're going to find out as history goes on whether or not the Trump effort was successful, but there's a lot you don't know. And I think that's kind of what you could say from the 1990s or early 90s with Bush, that you're doing what you think is the right thing, what you hope is the right thing, and it may not always work. And so I'm trying to be as fair here to the former president as I possibly can be. Now, of course, with the Gulf War, I'm going to state this, that if you look back at Chichijima, how we kind of began the program, or the Bush segment of the program today, that was still in the forefront of Bush's mind. Getting shot down and almost knowing full well at Chichijima that all of the Americans who washed up on that island lost their lives, how 2 of his fellow airmen lost their lives, how he was rescued by the USS Finback. That was all in the forefront of President Bush's mind when Operation Desert Shield and then Desert Storm kicked off. For Bush, it was always about what is the objective. The objective is to get the Iraqis out of Kuwait, period. That was what he went to the UN and fought for. And as soon as he got the Iraqis to flee Kuwait, that was the end of it. That was the end of the mission. The war was over. Now, granted, there was a long policy of containment, and then Iraqi freedom kicked off when his son, George W. Bush, succeeded him. We did a whole show on this, and he did an 8-part series on this. So I don't want to beat that horse dead, but the fact is, when we had a 100-hour war, ground war, a lot of that was the fact that Bush remembered what it was like to actually fight in a real war. And he did not want to see that current generation go through a long, protracted campaign. I think that was very smart at that time. So when he finished up in the Gulf War, his approval ratings were in the 90s. I think it was like 93%, 91% approval ratings. It was sky high. And we're going to take a look right now at a clip of when he announced the liberation of Kuwait.
Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met. Kuwait is once more in the hands of Kuwaitis in control of their own destiny. We share in their joy, a joy tempered only by our compassion for their ordeal. Tonight, the Kuwaiti flag once again flies above the capital of a free and sovereign nation. I am pleased to announce that at midnight tonight, Eastern Standard Time, exactly 100 hours since ground operations commenced and 6 weeks since the start of Operation Desert Storm, all United States and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations. It is up to Iraq whether this suspension on the part of the coalition becomes a permanent ceasefire. At every opportunity, I have said to the people of Iraq that our quarrel was not with them, but instead with their leadership, and above all with Saddam Hussein. This remains the case. You, the people of Iraq, are not our enemy. We do not seek your destruction. We have treated your POWs with kindness. Coalition forces fought this war only as a last resort and look forward to the day when Iraq is led by people prepared to live in peace with their neighbors.
And that was the high watermark of the President Bush administration, because after that we went into an economic recession, and that read my lips, no new taxes pledge, well, that kind of went out the door. And then you had H. Ross Perot jumped into the race and got a lot of support from conservatives who were upset with Bush over raising taxes. Perot actually jumped in because of the prisoner of war missing in action issue. There wasn't a situation where Ted Sampley of U.S. Veteran News and Report had orchestrated a protest against Bush at the League of POW-MIA Families, National League of POW-MIA Families, and Bush said, "Sit down, shut up, and let me finish." That angered Perot. Perot jumped into the race, and 1992, Bill Clinton became president. Clinton only got 43% of the vote, so it was not a huge mandate. It was the fact that some of the votes were siphoned off. So we're going to take a look for 1 minute at President Bush's concession speech in 1992.
You guys. Hey. Thank you very much. Look. Thank you so much. Well, here's the way I see it. Here's the way we see it, and the country should see it, that the people have spoken, and we respect the majesty of the democratic system. I just called Governor Clinton over in Little Rock and offered my congratulations. He did run a strong campaign. I wish him well in the White House, and I want the country to know that our entire administration will work closely with his team to ensure the smooth transition of power. There is important work to be done, and America must always come first, so we will get behind this new president.
And we're going to only show that briefly because after that, Bush and Clinton actually became friends, and they worked on some initiatives together. But you know, that loss really stung. And I will also point out that Lee Atwater's campaign manager from 1988 had passed away from a brain tumor and was not there to orchestrate the 92 campaign. I think if Atwater was still there, things would have been different. Nonetheless, he was proud when his sons, Jeb and George, became governors of Florida and Texas. And then when George W. Bush became the president, that kind of vindicated the Bush family on things. And then he ended up spending the rest of the time in retirement, mainly away from the public eye, and doing his best to just enjoy the time he had with his wife, Barbara, who passed away this past April, and then with his grandchildren. And so then on November 30th, George H.W. Bush passed away at the age of 94. We're going to leave you with one clip from his funeral, and this is going to be Michael W. Smith singing his song, Friends.
packing up the dreams God planted in the fertile soil of you. I can't believe the hopes He's granted. Means a chapter in your life is through. But we'll keep you close as always. It won't even seem you've gone. 'Cause our hearts in big and small ways will keep the love that keeps us strong. Friends are friends forever if the Lord's the Lord of them. And a friend will not say never, 'cause the welcome will not end. Though it's hard to let you go, in the Father's hands we know that a lifetime's not too long to live as friends. With the faith and love God's given, springing from the hope we know, and we will pray the joy you're living is the strength that now you show. But we'll keep you close as always. It won't even seem you've gone. 'Cause our hearts in big and small ways will keep the love that keeps
For Dallas Pearson,
us
producer,
strong.
I'm your host, Jeff Williams, reminding you that you've got 18 shopping days left until Christmas. You're watching North Star Oasis. And I want to say thank you to President Bush for all that you've done for our grateful nation. May you rest in peace. For North Star Oasis, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
In the Father's hands we know that a lifetime's not too long to live